Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Well, today I want to talk about taking a stewardship approach to your benevolence ministry. Most churches have some sort of benevolence structure where they're basically meeting people in crisis and providing resources to bring relief in the midst of that crisis. And that is a beautiful thing. Keep doing it. It's wonderful. I'm in no way, shape, or form telling churches they should not be in that business. I think lifting the burdens of those in crisis is one of the most beautiful things the church can do. The problem is, oftentimes we see those benevolence ministries being isolated and focused solely on rescue from that crisis moment. There is very little attention or invitation into an understanding of the cause of those crisis moments. A lot of times they're just basically fixing the problem and not really understanding what caused the problem. And where we really can do some serious work and make meaningful impact is in the invitation for those families who are in crisis to step into a faithful stewardship role. Now, I recognize that in that crisis, they can't see straight, they can't understand, they can't even begin to address these underlying causes while they're in crisis. And so continue to provide those resources, meet them in that crisis, and take that pressure away. And so if it's that their utilities are going to be shut off, they're going to lose their heat, they're going to lose their water, we need to meet them in that crisis and make sure they stay safe and steady and confident, and we rescue them from that panic mode. But if that's all we're doing, we're giving them a fish. And what we want to be doing is be teaching people how to fish. We want to be giving them clarity and understanding of why they're ending up in a situation that has led to crisis and how to start cutting it off at the pass before it ever gets there. How to start building the disciplines into their financial life that lead to being stable on their own, that lead to facing these situations without panic and without making decisions that ultimately exacerbate the crisis. A lot of times I'll see people, for example, when they're in a situation where their heat is getting cut off, they'll let their water bill go super late so that they can keep their heat on, and then they lose their water. And then in order to keep their water on, they'll cut off their utility bills. We end up going back and forth, and we're just ping-ponging between crisis and crisis. And if the church steps in and alleviates that without somehow getting them to an awareness of the patterns that are leading to some of those crisis moments, we're just going to continue to rescue. And I love rescue. I am all for it. It is one of my favorite things. But I want to rescue, and then I want to prepare for what's next. I want to help these families move into stability and stewardship. And what that looks like, in my opinion, is giving them tools that simplify their life, that help them understand at a high level what their life actually costs, and helping them to start to see how the decisions that they make increase those costs and create more and more hardship and more crisis moments. And so one great example of that, a lot of times when we see people who are in a benevolence situation, they have a skewed understanding of what their life costs, and they count on that skewed understanding staying consistent. What I mean by that is maybe they're on a certain government assistance program. They get SNAP, the food assistance, or they get some sort of rent assistance or daycare assistance, and those costs have been mitigated and subsidized, and they think that their daycare costs what it costs after the subsidy, or that their rent costs what it costs after the subsidy, or that their food only costs $100 a month because the rest of it is covered on SNAP. And what we need to start to do is open them up to an understanding of what their full life actually costs. More often than not, I think this is a really big blind spot for people who are in crisis. They have a very big hill to climb to just understand these moving parts. And so what we like to see is that those individuals actually get to a place where they're including those subsidies in their income, even though they're not technically income. They are including them in their income from a cash flow standpoint, and then actually putting the full cost of the things they're spending into their budget, into their spending plan. So your groceries don't cost $100, they cost $800, and you're getting $700 worth of SNAP. That SNAP income goes into that cash flow in category, and then your groceries actually cost what they really cost. The reason why this is so incredibly important is because it helps to clarify how much income they actually need to create in order to cover the real cost of what their life is really experiencing. Those subsidies a lot of times can just be so confusing because they're only seeing $100 go out on groceries. So their thought is, my groceries cost me $100. But then if anything changes in that subsidy, if anything changes in their cash flow, then they're in crisis. Then they're playing a whack-a-mole game of which priorities do I have to take care of first because I have really limited resources and I didn't see it coming and I don't know what it costs. One of the most important things, I think, for a benevolence program to do is to make sure that part of the work that the family needs to do in order to maintain the connection to that benevolence is to take steps forward in their stewardship. And so by all means, get their heat turned back on, but then ask them to step into a class where you teach faithful stewardship, where they understand that inflow versus the outflow. They see where these problems are coming from. They see how they can end up being perpetuated because they have a misunderstanding of what their life actually costs. They're not tracking, they're not organizing their life in a way where they can fully step back and say, oh, my income from my job plus these other things, whether it's alimony or it's child support or it's subsidies, those cash flows that are coming in that could somehow randomly not be the same. We need to adjust for that and account for that so that we know if this changes, the costs that you're spending don't change. The cost of your groceries is the same, even if your SNAP benefit goes down. The cost of caring for your kids is the same. Your daycare costs, whether that subsidy comes in or not, or whether your child support payment comes in or not, some of those cash flows can really be unpredictable, but the costs are always there. And then they're surprised by how far off they are because they've been thinking of their cost as the net cost to them instead of the actual real cost of what they're experiencing. That is a huge step forward for most of these families. If they're in that situation, is just gaining that understanding, just gaining that clarity of how this really works. This is not something they get exposed to. We need to teach them those things. We're not seeing this type of work being done in the programs they're connected to because they just don't have the capacity to meet each of these individual families and help them understand this stuff. We have an incredible opportunity as the church to step into these families where they're in crisis, relieve the pain of the crisis, but then usher them into a much healthier view of what their life is costing and how their income flows are working. One of the other big wins of calling families in the benevolence programs into a stewardship curriculum is that we actually are giving them a sense of empowerment rather than just a handout. To expect from them that they would step further into stewardship. And there's a lot of times energy around seeking to understand why this is happening and where it came from and how to prevent it in the future. They don't want to be perpetually asking for help. And so if we invite them in, we're now giving them a sense of autonomy and confidence and empowerment. And that grows their sense of identity. It grows their sense of power in their circumstance. They're not powerless and helpless. They're capable. They can do this. But if all we do is hand out crisis relief, we're not actually giving them that next step of furthering their confidence and their sense of autonomy. We can accidentally be furthering dependency rather than fostering independence and stability. I would also argue that if we have this conversation in the context of discipleship, that faithful stewardship is part of Christian discipleship. This is not a financial discipline. This is a spiritual discipline. Because when the conversation is just about financial disciplines, they may very quickly dismiss it. They may say, well, I'm not wealthy. I'm never going to be wealthy. I'm never going to be smart enough to figure this out. I don't need to worry about it. I'll just kind of figure it out as I go. They don't have a higher sense of responsibility. But when we discuss this in the context of Christian discipleship, that they are called to be faithful stewards with all of God's resources, then they have a sense of responsibility, a sense of management and a requirement to honor the kingdom of God with these resources, those resources being their time, their skill, their labor, their talent, their financial resources for sure, their physical health. All of these things need to be part of this conversation so that we actually move them forward in that awareness that they are expected to multiply, to grow these resources for the kingdom. They are expected to be productive in their labor, to be effective in the work that they're doing, to share their skills and their talents, to not just get a paycheck and punch the clock. This is a much bigger conversation when it's in the context of Christian discipleship. And I think these families that are in crisis, once they're relieved from that crisis, they can be open to this next step forward. I think it's a beautiful opportunity for the church to make lasting, eternal impact on these families. When we inject the stewardship conversation into the benevolence ministry, we will see these families experience life change, heart change. We owe it to them to invite them in to that next step rather than just rescuing them and then leaving them dealing with the same issues and the same decisions that led to the crisis in the first place. If we don't solve the reason why they got to the crisis in the first place, they will come back to it. They will be perpetually in this crisis mode, and that is an exhausting, self-defeating, discouraging environment to live in. We have seen stewardship be injected into benevolence most effectively when these families are matched up with a coach, a stewardship coach that is walking with them, that is encouraging them, that is understanding how these things work, and is calling them back to account, calling them back to that responsibility in faithful stewardship. Good Sense actually has a coaching curriculum to help prepare your benevolence coaches, to help them understand how to encourage families, how to understand what families are going through, how to meet them where they are with dignity and kindness and warmth, and also give them very practical, tangible steps to take that will move them further in their stewardship journey. And so if this is an area that you want to see your church ministry grow and go beyond just rescue in the benevolence ministry, but actually move people towards stewardship, you can go to our website and check out those coaching resources at goodsensemovement.org. We have links to all of those, information about how those systems work in order to get your coaches trained up to meet these families in their moment of crisis and then grow them through it. Get them to a place where they are standing solidly in a place of faithful stewardship and honoring God with his resources. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.